A good strategic plan can be a CEO or executive director's most powerful tool that they will ever have at their disposal. It is that map that everybody needs to follow.
I'm Rich Frazier.
And I'm Russ Phaneuf.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement.
We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector.
Let's dive in. Welcome, listeners, to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. I'm your host, Rich Frazier. In today's episode, we are talking about strategic planning and its value for nonprofit success. Now, most of us who are or have been nonprofit leaders, we've kind of got a love-hate relationship with strategic planning. It can be time-consuming. It can be overly complex. Sometimes we see it as irrelevant in a fast-changing environment. And some folks may even have past experiences where their well-crafted strategic plans sat on a shelf, gathering dust and yielding very little practical benefit. But even with these reservations, strategic planning is a powerful tool. It can provide a clear direction. It can align our resources with mission-critical goals, and it can enhance organizational effectiveness. In today's episode, we're going to explore the tangible benefits of strategic planning. Yes, tangible benefits, from fostering long-term sustainability to improving stakeholder engagement. Stay tuned to discover why investing in a well-crafted strategic plan is worth your time and effort, and how it can propel your nonprofit towards greater impact and success. Joining us is a panel of nonprofit leaders I'm excited for you to meet. Back on our podcast, we have Nate Roten, the CEO at 1 in 10, a nonprofit in Phoenix dedicated to assisting and serving LGBTQ youth. Welcome back, Nate.
Thank you, Rich.
Also joining us is Rosi, CEO of Housing Families Incorporated in Malden, Massachusetts, a nonprofit organization working to achieve housing equity and well-being for all. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Barbara Wood, Vice President of Development and Communications for Beatitudes Campus Foundation, also located in Phoenix. Welcome, Barbara.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Full transparency, all of you are or have been IPM clients, including working with me to help you develop strategic plans. And in the case of Barbara and Laura, we are in the process of finalizing those plans right now. So first of all, I kind of like to go down the line and ask you about your history with strategic planning, whether it's your current strategic plan that we're working on or past strategic plans. Can you kind of walk me through your journey with strategic planning, which, by the way, producer Curtis, is kind of a weird question, walking me through your journey with strategic planning, but we're going to go with that. Maybe start with your initial impressions as a nonprofit leader with strategic plan, maybe the first time you participated in the process and how your views have evolved over time. Laura, your response?
Sure. I actually like this question. I think it has been a journey. And there's about 3 instances where I've been exposed to or part of strategic planning, because it's never been really embedded in our culture to do them regularly. The first one was before I was a CEO and I was a director, and the CEO brought me in to get some of my thoughts and kind of look at what had already been done. And he wanted me to put my thoughts and ideas into boxes. And I had thoughts and ideas to share, but I couldn't put them into boxes. And I think we were like missing each other, and it was frustrating. And I never heard anything about it again. Then fast forward about 10 years, and our board we did a strategic plan last year, 2 years ago. And we had a consultant working with us, and it was a great experience for everyone that was part of it, but it was just our board and me and the consultant. Mm-hmm. We got aligned with, what our bigger goals and objectives were, and they were really focused around diversifying our revenue and building out our board stuff. There was a lot of work that the board had to do. And once we finished that first part of these big goals, then there was no support or follow-up with me to bring it back to staff and engaging them. So those 2 years, I kind of felt like I was carrying it and trying to like make sure that I was on task with everything. To this year, and I will say the common theme is going to be painful. So bringing it back to my staff and like sitting there and being like, what are we going to do? What are the KPIs? And we all just kind of sat there like, I don't know. It was a painful day of trying, and we didn't do much. But now we've been going through the process with Rich, as you mentioned, and while there are parts that are definitely painful, having a consultant and a partner, someone who has the expertise of kind of knowing what it looks like, what the process should be, to partner with me where I know the stakeholders and I can bring the relationship and kind of how to navigate them and the emotional part of things. We're already further along, and it is an investment. It takes a lot more time than I have ever seen our agency put into it, but it's really breaking things down into clear action steps for everybody. So, there's lots of different levels part of this plan, and some are new to it, some are not. And I think it's been hard for everybody, but also everyone feeling like relieved and aligned with kind of where we're going. So it has been a journey, and it's been a good one, and I am excited to see the outcome.
Well, good. And I'm interested to talk more about that and dive into it. Painful is not the word that I would use, though.
That's because you're the expert. You have to guide us non-experts. It's painful for us.
Messy, maybe. Messy. Nate.
Sure. Strategic planning, I think for many people probably brings up all kinds of emotions. I know for me, in my 26-year professional career, I have had the honor of serving on quite a few different boards and being part of these strategic planning retreats, if you will, which retreat is the wrong word because that suggests being at a spa, relaxing and enjoying oneself. And that is not typically my experience with strategic planning. However, I have been part of boards that were very much working boards, trying to save an organization that was financially very unstable, and saw how the strategic plan was a key component in righting that ship or turning the direction of the organization around, to examples where even here at 1 in 10, my very first day on the job, I was able to join the board and my predecessor in their strategic planning session. And it was great. But what I came to find out after the fact was that there was a real disconnect in the information that the board had versus what staff had and what staff was feeling on a day-to-day basis. And when you have that disconnect, what happens with that strategic plan? It goes on a shelf, like you said, Rick.
Yeah.
And because it's not really actionable. It was also filled with BHAGs, those big, hairy, audacious goals that the board thought were great, and they were on paper and they looked flashy, but they weren't possible, or the organization wasn't ready from a capacity standpoint to activate on those goals. So when you have that disconnect, it really doesn't work. Then right out of the pandemic, my board, well-intentioned, really wanted a new strategic plan. We tried in 2021, April of 21. I don't know if you all remember, but we had all just got our vaccines. We thought it was time to get together. We were properly spaced in a big room, all those things. But we came up with a plan that then the pandemic wasn't done with us, and we had to go back into it. And we were really operating on a more month-to-month or very short-term perspective. And a strategic plan that was anything more than a few months wasn't going to be fruitful for us. So when we finally were able to put one together, this current plan, and I look forward to sharing more about that as we move on into the podcast, but it really was very different. So I have gone through all of the emotional curves, bell curves, if you will, of from being that feeling when you're a kid and a kickball gets kicked into your stomach and all the air gets knocked out of you. That's what some of the bad strategic plans have felt like for me as a leader, to feeling very much refueled and seeing how, particularly for my senior leadership team and my board and our donors, how a good strategic plan can provide that fuel that reignites everything, even after you've been in your role for 9 years and you are excited to get back to work that next day and get to work on this new plan. So It really runs the gamut.
So much visual imagery that you conjured up there, Nate. I want to come back to a couple of things that you mentioned, but first I want to ask Barbara, tell us about your journey with strategic planning, because I know that you've experienced it like on the big university level and now at the sort of independent nonprofit level.
Right. And I agree with everybody else that it is a journey. And the very first one I did early in my career, it was a very interesting process and one that I approached with dread because we were supposed to have all this information for the strategic plan. So we spent our retreat, as Nate talks about it. We did our day-long thing. Our consultant put everything in a chart, and we never looked at it again until the end of the year when we reported back to the board, and we tried to put what we did that whole year that was uninformed by the strategic plan. We tried to place it into the slots of the strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, what a wasted effort that we had with that. We didn't let the plan inform us. But since then, the processes have gotten better, and some of them have been very strict with these they weren't agile plans. And as you know, as society changes, as things happen, as the pandemic happened, you have to be willing to adjust your plan to the world and what's happening around it. And as you indicated, we're right smack dab in the beginning of our strategic planning with you. And what a difference. I mean, I really approached it with energy, thinking that this is really going to bring us back focus on what we do, who we serve, how do we align all the stakeholders that we have. It really was refreshing and energetic.
So I want to go back and touch on a couple of things that you all have brought up. So Nate, one takeaway that I have from your comments is that when I facilitate a strategic planning retreat, we need to have massages available.
Yes, please.
If we are truly going to call it a retreat. But you mentioned in an earlier iteration of your career being in, I think Laura, you also brought this up, being in a strategic planning process where it was just the board and perhaps executive leadership and a consultant. And one of the things that I've talked about with each of you in our strategic planning sessions was the importance of having senior leadership in the room. While it's impossible to engage everybody in that planning process who's going to be responsible for implementing the plan, we can engage the staff who are in charge of the departments that are impacted by the plan, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because at the end of the day, you have to have that alignment factor. And if they're not part of the process and really digging into, okay, these are the goals and how do we get there? And how do we get there is a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's just, that's just not aligned with our culture. I don't think any staff would find that lifts up their morale. So, and that goes kind of to the piece of, we have a younger leadership team, and this one that we're doing right now is the first time that a lot of them, in fact, I think it's only me and my senior director of people and culture that have really been part of full strategic planning. So, it's been a learning for them. I will continue to hold on to the painful part. It's exhausting and it can feel overwhelming. Like, oh, how are we ever going to get there? We already have so much to do, and this sounds like a lot more being dumped on my plate. But again, if you're going to have that alignment and that buy-in, that this is what we're working for, knowing that it has to be, Barbara, to your point, an agile plan. It's a living document and we can make adjustments. You really need to bring them into the fold, and I'm grateful that we did that.
And in addition to the buy-in, back to your point, Nate, you can also create some really valuable alignment between staff and board members.
Absolutely. And I also think, being a CEO of a nonprofit can be a really lonely place to be. You hear that kind of saying a lot, but it doesn't have to be. And by involving your senior leadership team, we had a staff retreat a few months after the board retreat. So we had fully operationalized a lot of the strategic plan as a senior leadership team, but then we brought it to the staff and had them contribute really meaningful final touches to it. So we're all working on this together, also reminding them that they completed a survey and other different information input tools at the very beginning of this process that was, so long ago in many people's minds, but it's important to remind them. And I also think that the really powerful piece about a good strategic plan is, now board members like to say it holds people accountable. And it does do that. But what I like to say to our team, and what I really mean by this, is it's not just accountability, it's also holding us accountable as leaders to recognize incredible performance. So if we're sharing this with our team, if we're sharing the KPIs, if we're embedding that in the culture of what we do, so that every one of my program teams knows their goals and how those goals roll up into the greater strategic plan and these BHAGs that we are going to accomplish at the end of 3 years, it incentivizes everyone. And it also allows us to recognize that going above and beyond, which I think is even more important than holding people accountable to doing the bare minimum. And when you start to see a culture shift in that, it really makes everybody much more motivated, because we're all about celebrating the wins. It's not about the negatives or using it as a tool to ensure that people are doing the basic requirements of their position.
I love that you brought in celebrating the wins in there, right? And not just holding people accountable, but let's work together as a team to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And then let's celebrate together as a team. And it also gives everybody an opportunity to see that we need to roll with the changes. We need to be able to modify the plan as it needs to be modified, right? And this goes back to what Barbara was saying about this whole thing being a living, breathing document.
I can tell you about, we had done, it was a year before the pandemic, and we had done a beautiful planning process. It took place over several days. There was, we had our stakeholders engaged in it, to Laura's point and Nate's point that people have to own it, and we had that. And it was a beautiful document. And when the pandemic hit, we couldn't work on it. We were busy saving lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our number one goal. But we went back to it, and we went back to it slowly, and we were able to modify certain things that no longer could happen or were no longer important. And I think in one regard, the pandemic really informed our future, and really made us readjust to realities. And we were able to adjust our strategic plan to that too. We still had the main pillars, but how we reached our goals were just a little bit different. And that makes that plan a living, breathing document. Your overall goals are still the same.
Yeah.
Basically, it's just how do you get to them? And that's what I mean by a living, breathing document. Who knows what could happen? Your buildings could catch on fire and you can't do anything for a month or 2 or 3. I mean, we have to do it in such a way that we're prepared for eventualities that we have no control over.
Laura, you had your hand up.
No, I would just say that's part of too the benefit of having an expert guide you through it, because when we were defining our big objectives with the board, we have in Massachusetts, we have a housing crisis, and all of a sudden we had numerous new arrivals coming, and we have a right to shelter in our state, and housing families was built on this premise of like meeting the crisis at hand. And you can't predict what that's going to be. And that has been kind of a gap between the board and staff of wanting everything to be intentional and thought through, and having the space for that discussion to kind of reconcile those 2 points. Then Rich was able to take that and incorporate that into our goal, that literally the word agility, to meet the community needs,
Yeah.
instead of being so specific as to what those are or think we're going to know what those are in the future, to write the goal more broadly so that it really can be a living document and flexible.
And when you are a mission-driven organization meeting community needs, change is sort of ingrained in what you do. So you have to be able to be nimble and be agile and change. And so that has to be written into the plan, literally written into the plan. Hi, this is Rich Frazier, host of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. As you can tell from this episode, I'm a pretty big fan of strategic planning. If your nonprofit is interested in strategic planning, but you're not sure where to start, or if you've had strategic planning sessions in the past that didn't translate into positive results for your organization, we can help. Just go to ipmadvancement.com/contact, enter a few details, and one of us at IPM will reach back out to you. It's that easy. That website again, ipmadvancement.com/contact. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now, let's return to the episode. Let's take the plan off the shelf. Let's make sure that we are following the plan. Let's make sure that we are adjusting the plan as necessary. How do we do that? How do we measure the plan to ensure that we're making progress? How do you and your board determine the right metrics or key performance indicators to use to measure the effectiveness of your strategic plan? And Nate, since yours is complete, I'm going to start with you again.
Yeah, I think this is incredibly important. Looking at, we always hear the term SMART goals, and that M in SMART is measurable. So how are we ensuring that we can measure the success of the plan or lack of success of the plan down the road? And I think what's key here too is to get that buy-in, not just from the board, but also your staff too. And so we've incorporated different parts of our staff annual goals. So for each of their teams, we've taken those and looked at how those could be incorporated into the strategic plan. So in some cases, they were things we're already measuring. We know we have capacity to measure them. We know we have the systems to be able to quantify or to evaluate. And so those have been utilized. But as we looked at specific parts of the strategic plan, say for us, we're opening a new location. Our current KPIs that we're tracking would not necessarily speak to that particular goal. So looking at what specific measurables will denote success for that particular goal is important. And not all KPIs are going to be applicable to all parts of your strategic plan. So for us, and Rich, I think you may agree, I think maybe you have even said this, that we have maybe too many KPIs in ours. It's a little daunting. However, they're not all being used for all parts. And so we've really been able to break those down. We created a kind of a Gantt chart, so a flow chart, if you will, over time. So we know as of today, in May of 2024, of this 3-year strategic plan, what are the KPIs that we're measuring today?
Yes.
Because there's going to be parts of the strategic plan that we're not even going to really, not that we're not focusing on it, but it's not critical right now for us to do anything for that goal until October of 2025. So the KPIs related to that are not part of our world right now. And so we have a really great snapshot of what we need to measure. Then from there, in our board retreat this year, so this would be the board retreat a year after the one where they worked to develop the framework of the strategic plan, we have gone further to ask the board, what are the KPIs that you all know that are part of the strategic plan, that you know we're measuring all these things? What are the ones that are most critical to you? And those flowed through onto the dashboard. Now, those could change year to year because, again, we'll have different parts of the strategic plan that we're activating against in different years. But for this year, we know that on the board dashboard, they want to see X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
So they have input and say into that. At any given point, they can ask about any of the KPIs. and they trust that we are tracking those, but they don't need to get into the weeds. They're not a working board, they're a governance board. And so what are the critical KPIs that they need for that? Then one step further, for my evaluation for 2024, I met with our governance chair and our board chair, and as part of my annual evaluation for last year, we created the KPIs that I will be evaluated against for next year. So we're all on the same page. They're all part of our strategic plan, but what are the critical pieces that really speak to the CEO's performance in this, where at the end of the year, they can say, Nate did a great job, or, hey, Nate's not doing great in this area. What are the additional supports needed? Let's talk, let's really focus on this. Let's talk to him. Let's get his input on this, and let's see what we need to do differently. Again, it's not just about getting people in trouble for not doing the work. It's about really making sure that we have the right resources, the right people, and the right supports to be able to find success in whatever we're doing.
Yeah, it's ensuring that people have what they need to get the job done.
Right.
And I love that you went down the road that, hey, we don't have to do all of this at once. And so we don't have to measure it all at the same time. And I'm glad you got that Gantt chart done.
Yeah.
So Barb, I'm going to go to you. So because we are now in the stage of planning where we are developing strategies and actions, developing deadlines and timelines, and developing those KPIs. So what are your thoughts then on what are the right KPIs and how do we get to those right KPIs?
Right. I think the KPIs are one of the most important part of the plan, because not only does it measure success, but I also think KPIs can change over time. If say you're evaluating a program and you're just looking at how attendance at the program has increased, you want to increase attendance to, a lecture series or something, 2%, every 6 months. Is that really what you want to measure, or do you want to measure stakeholder satisfaction with that program? And I think we all go to the easy ways, the financials. Did we hit the financial goal? Well, is it more important to look at we've raised 10% more money than we did the year before?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you really have to have it written out in dollars? But I think it's important every year to see if the KPIs are really measuring what you want it to measure, or are you just doing it, say, for the board of directors?
Right. Laura, is there anything that you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think just to build on Barbara's point about what is it that you want to measure, and do you have the capacity already to measure that? So, for example, if you're working within a contract that is based on numbers and like move outs of shelters, that's easy. But when you're building strategic plans that are based on like the quality, you have to define what are the outcomes that will actually speak to that. And then how balancing that again with how much are you asking of staff? Like, well, now we also have to collect this, and we don't have the database yet that can do that. And it might mean putting something in here. And so the KPIs might sound easy on the surface. And when you dig down into how you're going to get there, sometimes can be challenging.
So let's go down that road a little bit more, because I want to make sure that we give our listeners some specific advice to improve their own planning process. So I wanted to ask if you have experienced or have any innovative approaches or technologies that you've integrated into the strategic planning process. There might be something specific to measuring KPIs, or there might be something specific to collecting data that we need just to implement new programs. Barbara?
I think there's a lot of tools out there. As we're just at the beginning of our current strategic planning process, I am hoping that how we measure things can be very automated. So to Laura's point, it doesn't add a lot of staff time to collect them, because if it does, it's not going to be effective. It just isn't. But if there's an automated way to collect whatever data it is or to reach that KPI, I know there's a lot of things out there.
Or, I mean, maybe it will just highlight, okay, we're not measuring what we want to measure, and we need a person that can tie it all together. And then you create a role because it's tied to your strategic plan and your objectives that are important, but folks don't have the capacity to enter things into multiple systems or constantly interviewing clients. So you need to dedicate a role, and then you have a priority when you're setting the budget that will support.
And I agree with what Laura's saying. And a very important part of the whole process is, do you have the resources, not just to do what you say you want to do, but do you have the resources to manage your effectiveness?
Nate, you're a year into your most recent strategic plan. How are you managing the resources? How are you measuring your KPIs?
Just to correct you, Rich, we're really only 4 months, 23 days into our strategic plan. Yes, we did it last year, but it didn't effectively start till January 1st. I have to remind my board of this frequently as well.
Then we were way ahead of the goal in creating this strategic plan. Go us.
We needed the runway to be able to get to where we are today. But no, I think it's a continual effort. And I think that there's a lot of different technologies out there that certainly can help. I can't wait till ChatGPT or Alexa or Siri can just do it all for us. But we converted completely over to Salesforce in 2017 as an organization. So we really have, or actually 18, but we really have the luxury of having a good data management system. So we're able to pull data, and we do annual surveys of the youth that we serve. So that's been great. But we've had to really look at some creative solutions around how we're ensuring that we're capturing everything that we need to. And what I mean by that is really looking around the table, the proverbial table, if you will, and seeing who isn't there. So whether that means from a board perspective or our staff perspective or the youth data that we have, what are we missing? And are there identities or people, youth that we serve that are not reflected in the numbers? And I think when you look at it that way, it's really eye-opening. One of the pieces of our new strategic plan is to really look at our accessibility of our programs across all different definitions of accessibility. So that could mean neurodiversity. It can mean differently abled folks. It could mean different parts of our LGBTQ community. It could mean geographic accessibility, digital accessibility. We've had to really educate ourselves on all of the various ways that accessibility can play into our programs and challenge ourselves, because you can always, as a smaller nonprofit, I mean, even though we've grown a lot at 1 in 10, we're still an annual budget of $5 million right now.
Yeah.
And we've quintupled in size over the last 6-7 years, but that's still small. We're still the little engine that could. And because of that, it can be challenging sometimes to measure some of these things. I think being open to new technologies is great, but also you can go back to conversations and the one-on-one collection of data through surveys or those types of things are critical, particularly at filling in those gaps of who is not reflected in the data.
I'm going to take a left turn here. I'm going to start with Barbara, but what's a key aha or light bulb moment that you've had in strategic planning that you wish you might have had years ago?
Wow. I think one of the keys is to have a facilitator who knows about your stakeholders, who knows about your organization. As you were talking about earlier, I do recall about our early experiences. I do recall one time where we had a facilitator who was a good facilitator, but knew nothing about our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty meaningless. In the end. Yes, it's good to have different points of view, but the two most successful strategic planning sessions I have been part of had a facilitator that knew your business. And I think that's hugely important to have. And to have a facilitator. Not all organizations use a facilitator when they're doing strategic planning. You know, they think they know it all. And I also think it's good to have fun when you're doing strategic planning.
I agree with all three of those comments there, Barbara.
Well, and it just, you have to have fun. And particularly at the last one that you did, we had fun. We laughed, we joked, we sometimes cried. And you have to have fun because then you're owning it.
Well, we don't have to talk about that time I broke down in tears, but I do think that, an important part that you brought up was that, knowing the agency, knowing the organizations, the process of strategic planning takes place long before you walk into that retreat. And, it takes place, and I'm speaking from a facilitator's viewpoint. There's a lot of discovery that has to take place beforehand, understanding the organization and the stakeholders, and understanding the organization's goals and where everybody wants to go, and then finding that common ground and how to get everybody on the same page. Laura, what was your aha moment?
I think a lot of it has been summed up. Definitely have a facilitator. I would never be able to do all of this. And Rich, to your point about the discovery, that part alone is a lot of work, and gathering all the information and then giving the group something to work off of, instead of let's just start from scratch and everyone just sits there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that that you came in like knowing about our clients or our agency. Well, you kind of did because I had hired you for something else, but really interviewing to make sure that the facilitator's values are aligned with your values, because at least then you're working from the same foundation and it doesn't matter what you're talking about.
Sure.
If your values are aligned. I think what I'm looking forward to this time from learnings to apply to this one, it's not aha, but is just being very clear on who is responsible for what, and for the reporting out piece, I think is good. But the ahas are important. I think the last aha I had was when I was preparing for this. I was thinking like about that alignment and the buy-in and the value of the strategic plan. A lot of times I will have ideas in my heads and I know where the agency's going. And it so happens that our objectives, I said to Rich, I'm like, oh, this is great. We're already like moving here, because in my head, it's all there and I knew where we're going. But then and so I can make small decisions to take advantage of opportunities that come up. And then the big opportunity is ready. And it's like, oh, now I got to get all these people on board because it hasn't been necessarily defined, or I've had some pocket conversations and some people might not be ready to make that leap. So I think for me, the aha is, as much as I don't like process and details and all of that, it's a good tool for being but see, it's defined in here. This is where we want to go.
When you codify it and put it on paper or, your virtual document, it's there for everybody to see. This is the direction we're going to take our organization. We all agreed.
Yeah.
Nate, your aha moment?
I think a couple of things, and again, similar to Laura and Barbara, the facilitator is key, but this whole process piece that Laura mentioned as well is to have a small work group of your board and yourself and maybe one other senior leader that's doing this work ahead of time. So from the RFP process to select the facilitator to the goals of the retreat, et cetera, that's so key. And something that I hadn't done previously in some of my other experiences. Another aha moment for me, and this wasn't this last retreat, but several years ago with my staff, you really have to be honest with yourself, and the organization needs to be honest about where you are. And our staff coming out of the pandemic, they were not at a place to look at operationalizing a strategic plan. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of work that we needed to do around team building and to really answer some questions that, frankly, a lot of organizations were having to deal with coming out of the pandemic, and different work styles of millennials versus zillennials versus Gen X, like myself, or baby boomers. Like everyone had different interests, needs, wants. And if you're not answering the underlying issues going on, it can not only mean that you're not ready to put together a good strategic plan, but it can completely undermine the strategic plan and make it a failure before it even starts. So if your organization is in financial strife, I think looking at a shorter term plan, it doesn't mean you can't plan, you can, but to come up with a 5-year strategic plan when you don't know if you can make payroll next week, which fortunately for us and most of the orgs I've been involved with has not been the case. But one that I was on the board with years ago, that was definitely the reality for them. To talk about what we're doing in a few years just wasn't, the executive director didn't have capacity to think that far out. And I don't blame him. But so I think really being honest with where you are as an organization and what you need. So is it a 12-month plan, 2-month plan? Is it a 3 or 5-year plan? And working with your third-party facilitator to put that together then is just key if you're going to find success.
Okay. So it's almost time for us to go. But before we do, I'd like to ask all of you, what's one thing that you want listeners to take away from this conversation? And or if there's somebody still on the fence on strategic planning, what would you say to them to convince them to just do it? Nate, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Rich. I would say a good strategic plan can be a CEO or executive director's most powerful tool that they will ever have at their disposal. And that includes, from a board perspective, ensuring that you have congruency across the board. But then as new members come on, old members go off, this is the map that the new member gets, and they can understand this is the direction of this organization. It can even be a tool for board recruitment. So you're not recruiting someone to your board that is totally misaligned with what the goals are in this strategic plan. It is that map that everybody needs to follow. And if they're not on board with it, this isn't the right board for them to be on. So it allows you to use it in that way. It also, for me, has been such a powerful tool for my own personal motivation and also my senior leadership team. I saw after our retreat last year with the board, which my senior leadership team was a part of, they came out of it just reinvigorated and ready to tackle these big goals. It was the exact opposite of what you might think if you're a leader that is like, well, it's just going to be more work for me. Yes, it is, but it also allowed me to get everybody on the same page, and they're all working on it. They're working so hard. And at the end of the day, I'm responsible for it with my board, but also my board is part of that work. But now all of their teams, and I see firsthand in the time that we've been actualizing this, where it's from top to bottom, everybody is more engaged than they have been in quite some time because we're all operating on the same framework and map. And so as I know, a bad strategic plan can do the opposite. So that's why you got to do your homework and you got to plan for it. But if you do the right steps, you'll have a really great tool at your disposal.
Great. Thanks, Nate. Barbara.
I say just do it. If you're on the fence of that, a strategic plan isn't just the retreat, the day-long or 2-day-long retreat that you're doing to create the future of your organization. It is with you for the entire journey. It is what guides decisions. And if you want to go clear left field on something for your organization, you always have that strategic plan to look at that guides you. Is that really why we're here?
Yeah.
To do this far-flung idea that we all think is really cool, but is that why we're here? Does that support the mission? A strategic plan just helps with decision-making.
Absolutely, it does. Laura.
The key takeaways, I think, are doing a good strategic plan is going to take a long time. It's not just a retreat, that Barbara just said. So really contract it out and hand it off to somebody, make the investment, because I don't know, Rich, how much time did you spend in discovery alone?
I usually budget at least a month or more.
And you're interviewing the board, you're interviewing staff, you're getting data from client perspective. Like that is a lot.
Yeah.
Nobody can do that, and your staff can't do it. And then you gotta, once you have your board retreat part, like there's more work to do before we get to the strategy. So, definitely be prepared for the time. It's not going to be like a quick process, but it's worth the investment. And when you're looking for somebody, if somebody said this before too, but know yourself. Like if you know that you don't like process, or you're going to struggle defining the KPIs and whatnot, like find someone that complements you, but yet whose values and you have the same foundation. That will be the interview process for choosing who you're going to work with is key. And for the person that's hesitant, I would just say it is part of it is to protect yourself, or you get more knowledge. Like, why are you hesitant? Are you worried that you and your board aren't aligned? It's still good information to know. Like if they don't want to go to the same spot, or you see some of the voices that get elevated, or staff, that aren't kind of aligned. That's information that you should know. Work is a huge part of our lives. And especially when you're doing mission-driven work, if you don't have the same vision of where you're going or how you're going to do it, then these are important things that we should all be asking if we want to spend our time this way.
All right. Thank you. And great takeaways. So before we go, last thing, where can listeners learn more about you and your organizations? And we're going to go in reverse order here. Laura, I'd like to start with you. Where can we learn more about you and Housing Families?
www.housingfamilies.org.
And Barbara Wood, Beatitudes Campus. Where can we find out more about you and Beatitudes?
You can go to our Beatitudes Campus website at beatitudescampus, all one word, .org.
And Nate Roten, tell us about 1 in 10.
Thanks, Rich. They can go to our website at 1in10.org. That's spelled out ONE, the letter N, TEN.org, or our LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram pages.
Nate Roten, Barbara Wood, Laura Rosi, we really appreciate you being on the show today. Thank you. We appreciate the work that you do for your communities, and thank you to you and your teams and your boards of directors. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks to our producer, Curtis Schmidt. I take it back. That was a great lead question that you gave me. So thank you for planting that. And to you, our listeners, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.